So we have some interesting news when it comes to Don Callis and Impact Wrestling. Now, I know what people are going to say. Enough with Don Callis, enough. We know that he's no longer an executive with Impact Wrestling. But like I said before, this is an ongoing story. And there is ramifications to it. And there is more information that comes out every single day about this, and it's essentially been confirmed now, not by Anthem or Impact or AEW for that matter, but by a variety of different sources and websites and reputable journalists online, that Don Callis is no longer an executive with Anthem Sports and Entertainment. He's no longer a co-executive vice president with Impact Wrestling alongside Scott D'Amore. It's just Scott D'Amore at the moment in that executive vice president role, and it looks like Don Callis, again, we don't know, this hasn't been confirmed, but it looks like Don Callis has signed with AEW as a talent, an on-screen talent only. He is Kenny Omega's manager on screen, and he will still be appearing for Impact Wrestling going forward as long as Kenny Omega is there, because if Kenny Omega's there, Don Callis goes there as his on-screen manager. That's the storyline, that's the angle, that's the gimmick, but in terms of being an executive, in terms of being an official of Impact Wrestling, Don Callis is no longer in that position. Now, when we first spoke about this previously, when we spoke about Don Callis being removed from Anthem's website, his duties being significantly reduced by Impact Wrestling, there was a lot of discussion about, was it a work? Is it kayfabe? Is it an angle? Because, of course, recently on Impact Wrestling television, Don Callis was confronted by Scott D'Amore, wasn't he? He came up to Don Callis, Scott D'Amore, and said, look, You've got to choose a side here. You can't be an executive vice president of Impact Wrestling, and you can't also be Kenny Omega's manager. You've got to be one of the two, because it's a conflict of interest. You can't have the best interests of this company in your heart and in your brain if you're managing the Impact World Champion and the AEW World Champion and the AAA Mega Champion. It just doesn't work like that. You're going to have to make a decision. Because of that angle, because of that segment that they did on television at the time, a lot of people said, well, that makes sense that he would be removed from Anthem's website, right? It's part of the angle, brother. It's part of the gimmick. It's a work. Pro wrestling is a work. Well, that obviously doesn't look to be accurate, but there does look like there were plans for some kind of storyline or some kind of angle between Don Callis and Scott D'Amore when it comes to being executives of Impact Wrestling on television. Now, it's a really interesting report here. This is why I wanted to talk about it today, because when it comes to this potential storyline, it's fascinating to see if it had have played out in the future. So, as I mentioned, it had emerged recently that Don Callis is no longer an executive vice president with Impact Wrestling. He left the role last month, as far as we're aware, maybe even left it prior to that. But questions about Callis's Impact future initially arose after his executive profile was removed from parent company Anthem Sports and Entertainment's website, and the Invisible Hand's departure from the role has since been confirmed, as I mentioned, by a variety of different outlets. Now, he will continue with Impact Wrestling for now on an on-screen capacity as Kenny Omega's manager, with Kenny Omega being the unified Impact World Champion. But it did initially appear that Callis leaving his executive role would just be part of a storyline in Impact Wrestling, as Scott D'Amore recently said the former color commentator for New Japan and Impact, quote, needed to decide if he's an Impact EVP or part of Omega's family. Now, according to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and according to Dave Meltzer, Scott D'Amore's comments were indeed designed to kick off a storyline through to a Slammiversary match or segment or something like that, which would have culminated with Callis joining AEW, at which he would no longer be seen as an on-screen authority figure. The removal of Callis's profile from Anthem's website before the storyline could play out, could have scuppered these plans, however. So it's interesting, because I think what we're seeing here is a little bit of both. Obviously, the plans are, and the reality is that Don Callis is no longer an executive with Impact Wrestling. Those are the facts at this point. His profile was removed from the Anthem website. And to be honest, that scrapped plan or potentially scrapped plan was kind of what I was saying anyway before, that the reality is that Don Callis is no longer an EVP with the company, but they could turn reality into a storyline, right? It's a work, and the best pro wrestling storylines are when you blur the lines between reality and between fiction, and the truth lies in between there, and all that kind of stuff. That's when the best pro wrestling storylines, the best pro wrestling moments throughout the history of this industry have ever happened. And I felt that could be the case of Don Callis here, in that, yes, he is leaving Impact Wrestling, and yes, the intentions are for him to sign as an AEW talent, but what they could do is play it out in terms of, you know, Don Callis gets given the ultimatum by Scott D'Amore. He then decides that at Slammiversary or whatever, or Scott D'Amore, then says to him, look, because you've made your decision or because you refuse to make a decision, the board of directors, I myself, and everyone in Anthem Sports and Entertainment, they've made the decision for you. You are no longer an executive vice president with Impact Wrestling. You're gone. And maybe it could still be a similar situation like that. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. We could see a scenario whereby maybe Kenny Omega does lose the Impact World Championship at Slammiversary. I don't know if that's the case. As I mentioned before, I think the chances of Omega losing the Impact World Championship go up massively once he loses the AEW World Championship. We just don't know when that's going to be. But for instance, if Kenny Omega does say Moose at Slammiversary, then for me there's a strong possibility he could drop the championship, and we could see a situation whereby Impact is trying to remove essentially the cancer from the company, in the sense that Moose beats Kenny Omega at Slammiversary, he wins the Impact World Championship, and then maybe Scott D'Amore comes out and says, oh, and by the way, you're fired, Don Callis. You're no longer an executive vice president with Impact Wrestling. The board of directors, Anthem, they've decided to strip you of your executive duties. You are no longer required. You are in breach of contract for managing Omega. You decided to choose Omega over Impact Wrestling, and for that, you're fired. You're heading off to AEW, and you can take Kenny Omega, and you can take the Good Brothers with you, or something like that. They could maybe do something like that, or maybe say you can take Kenny Omega with you, but you two, the Good Brothers, you've got to stay because you've got contracts with Impact Wrestling, and for what you've done to this company and for what you've done to AEW, you are going to be punished every single day. And we could let you go to AEW, but we'd much rather have you here and make your lives miserable. They could do a storyline or a situation like that, and I think there's a real possibility that they do go in that direction for it. So it's interesting. Now, as I mentioned or Dave Meltzer mentions in the report in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, these plans now could have changed because Don Callis' profile got removed from the Anthem website, and that is a possibility as well. Maybe the plan was for Don Callis to essentially finish up with Impact Wrestling just as a talent at Slammiversary, maybe the same time as Kenny Omega did, and then they could go off to AEW. But maybe, I don't know, Anthem jumped the gun, or the people in Anthem that update the website or whatever jumped the gun and removed Don Callis' profile from the website. And I don't know, maybe they'd assumed that pro wrestling fans weren't that sort of savvy in terms of investigating these kind of things and thought, I don't know, no one's going to look at the Anthem website and the Anthem executives. No one's going to pay that much attention. Just get rid of him. It won't matter. People won't look. But if they did think that, they are severely underestimating pro wrestling fans, because pro wrestling fans are some of the best and worst detectives ever, because they will see stuff like that and they will run with it, and they will ignore facts, they will embrace fiction, but they do find this kind of stuff. And maybe it's a case of, as I mentioned, Anthem thought that no one was going to notice. People have noticed, and maybe now Impact changed things. But to be honest with you, I don't know if Impact would really do that, to be honest. I think Impact Wrestling, historically, if people find the true story, they still kind of go with it, because look, either way, they've got to find a way of writing Don Callis off of television, because he is no longer an executive with the company, and he is no longer going to be seen on television. They can't just have him just disappear when Kenny Omega disappears, right? As pro wrestling fans, and as a fan of Impact Wrestling myself, and someone that has watched a lot of Impact Wrestling content over the course of the last couple of years, and someone has watched a lot of Don Callis' version of Impact Wrestling as it's kind of grown to a bit more of relevancy over the course of the last few years, I think people would want a bookend to that character, because he is a character on Impact Wrestling television, and a lot of Impact Wrestling fans that do watch on a regular basis are die-hard in the terms of they know what's going on behind the scenes. They know the characters on screen, but they also know the personalities behind the scenes as well. And I think those people would want Don Callis to be written off in a particular way, and I think they would want to have some form of closure on the character, and they would want to know what's going on. And I think Impact Wrestling would want to have a big moment and a big statement, and certainly they would want the publicity on social media and Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. They'd want people talking, oh, did you see it when Don Callis got fired at Slammiversary? Or Slammiversary is the pay-per-view that celebrates the anniversary of Impact Wrestling, and what better way to celebrate the anniversary of Impact Wrestling than to start a new chapter? And that chapter is without Don Callis and Kenny Omega, because Don Callis was fired and Kenny Omega lost the Impact World Championship, and now we're moving on to something new, and Moose won the Impact World Championship and he's re-signed with the company and all that kind of stuff. That would get a lot of people talking. In addition, to all of these possible former WWE and former Impact Wrestling stars that could return to Impact Wrestling at Slammiversary as well. So I would be really, really surprised, to be honest with you, if they don't write Don Callis off of television in some form or fashion, because, again, that just makes sense. It's just good business. Don Callis is a high-profile character. He certainly is high-profile in the sense that he was kind of, in charge of the day-to-day operations along with Scott D'Amore of Impact Wrestling, and certainly the creative direction and all that kind of stuff. So to have him just kind of disappear once this Kenny Omega angle or working relationship is over, I just don't see why they would do that. I think it doesn't make sense rather for them to do that. So whilst the Anthem removal of Don Callis from the website might have opened people's eyes to the end goal, I don't necessarily know if that changes that much, but it certainly is interesting to see that Dave Meltzer has seemingly confirmed that those comments by Scott D'Amore on Impact Wrestling Television were meaningful, and they were what people thought they were, in the sense that they were there to plant seeds for a future storyline that would eventually have Don Callis being removed from Impact Wrestling Television. And frankly, as I mentioned, I don't know if it really changes that much. I think at some point they're going to write him off of television. The biggest point is that he will go when Kenny Omega leaves Impact Wrestling Television. And that's, I guess, the difficult thing to find out, is when Kenny Omega will indeed leave Impact, or when he will just move back to being exclusive to AEW as no longer being the unified Impact World Champion. And I don't know the answer to that one. I know I've said before that I don't think it will be Slammiversary. I think the only way that it could be Slammiversary is if he faces Moose at Slammiversary. He's scheduled to face Moose at Against All Odds, but we don't necessarily know if that match is going to happen, because Kenny Omega versus Moose, or Kenny Omega rather, and Don Callis were only present for one day of the TV tapings last week, and that was day one, and after that they got everything they needed and left. So who's to say that they did film that match at Against All Odds? Only time will tell. As I mentioned, I said previously, and I still kind of stick to this, but I guess plans can change, and they will change, is that I felt that Kenny Omega would drop the Impact World Championship once he lost the AEW World Championship, because I didn't think AEW would want their World Champion losing cleanly to a talent from another company, because Kenny Omega, since he's become the AEW World Champion, he's not doing many jobs clean for talents in the middle of their AEW ring, and that's AEW talents on their own program, let alone Impact Wrestling talents on an Impact Wrestling broadcast. So I felt that they would be more comfortable with Kenny Omega dropping the championship and losing clean to an Impact Wrestling talent once he drops the AEW World Championship. But I don't see him dropping the AEW World Championship anytime soon, to be honest with you. I just don't. If you look at the talent that he's facing off against Double or Nothing later this week, no disrespect to them, but I don't see Orange Cassidy or Pac becoming the AEW World Champion anytime soon. The next time after that he would probably be likely to drop the AEW World Championship would be at All Out. That's at the end of August, beginning of September. That would be about a 9-month or so title reign. That's about fitting for a modern day World Championship reign, especially in AEW, who do tend to have slightly longer championship reigns. So if you look at, say, Omega dropping the championship in September, what's the nearest Impact pay-per-view to that? That's Bound for Glory. Historically, that's Impact's biggest pay-per-view event of the year. It's their WrestleMania. It's their Starrcade. So after Omega drops the championship at All Out, he can then drop the Impact World Championship at Bound for Glory. That timeline adds up to me, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right timeline that they're going to do things. I mean, as I mentioned, I think if there's one person that maybe AEW or Impact would push for to beat Kenny Omega at Slammiversary, it would be Moose. I know people talk about Samoa Joe and all that kind of stuff. That's really hypothetical, and we don't know about that. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating, and I know, as I mentioned before, people still don't necessarily. People might want to move on from Don Callis and all that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I get it. I really do get it. They're kind of just like, okay, we know he's leaving, let's move on. But there's still a lot more story to tell here, and there's still a lot more going on. When it comes to Don Callis here, so we'll have to watch this space. Something can and will happen in the future. We'll find out more in the coming weeks when it comes to Impact. A couple of other things I did want to talk about before we round it up here. There is buzz backstage at the latest Impact Wrestling television tapings for potentially a match of the year candidate when it comes to Impact Wrestling, for any pro wrestling company for that matter, because Fightful Select, which of course is Fightful's Patreon service, be sure to check that out and subscribe. They do a ton of exclusive and insider information, very accurate as well. Certainly over the course of the last 10 days or so, they've been the first to break so many major stories in the world of pro wrestling. So they're very reputable. Be sure to subscribe. They do very good stuff. Now, they are reporting, this is what they're saying about an upcoming X Division Championship match. Certainly looks like it's going to happen on Impact Wrestling Television. They said, quote, Fightful has heard of a lot of buzz coming out of the most recent Impact Wrestling Television tapings for an X Division Championship match that impressed many who watched it. Fightful are told that an hour-long X Division title match was filmed over that weekend, but weren't given the names of the participants. Now, that is really interesting. That when I saw that report, I thought, I've got to talk about it because it really piqued my interest. An hour-long X Division Championship match. So potentially we could be seeing an X Division Championship match that goes to a time limit draw. Sometimes they do with a 60-minute time limit, and we could be seeing a time limit draw. Who those competitors would be, logic would suggest, obviously, one of them is Josh Alexander. Who the next one is, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that one. Ace Austin, maybe. Chris Bay. Maybe a New Japan Pro Wrestling talent that's coming that we don't know about. I don't know. I mean, you can sound off in the comment section below who you think that will be against. I guess we'll find out once an X Division Championship match is advertised. This is kind of the beauty of knowing that these things are going to be coming up, is that we'll find out relatively soon who's involved in these matches, because once Impact Wrestling announces an X Division Championship match for an upcoming edition of Impact Wrestling on Access TV, we'll know what it's for. Unless maybe it happens at Against All Odds. That's a possibility as well. So either an X Division Championship match gets announced for an upcoming episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV, or we find out that an X Division Championship match is happening at Against All Odds, because that's been filmed as well. And we know going into it, it's going to be a classic. Now, obviously, a slight concern with that might be that if we're being told that there's so much buzz around this match, it's an hour long and all that kind of stuff, people are going to be like, wow, it's a bit spoilery because you know it's going to be an hour. So when you're watching it, if you're 10 minutes in, you know it's not going to end. How can you get on that journey? If you know a match is going to be good, it's going to be good. It's like going into an Iron Man match. You know that match is lasting an hour. It doesn't stop it from being as good, right? So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. And look, last year and at the beginning of this year, not that I was critical of Impact Wrestling, but I said that a big focus for Impact in 2021 should be to refocus the X Division. I think the X Division, over the course of like the last 18 months, had lost its identity, or coming into 2021, had lost its identity slightly, and because of a variety of things, because of maybe the World Championship picture, because of talent coming in, because of talent leaving, because of the pandemic, whatever, it kind of lost its way a bit. And it goes back to even like the Bischoff and Hogan years when they put a weight limit on it, then they took it off, then they were only competing in three-way matches and all this kind of stuff. It had lost a bit of identity over the course of the last few years. And coming into 2020, I looked at the X Division and said, you got to move the guys like Ace Austin, like Chris Bay, and even names like Josh Alexander and guys like Willie Mack and all of these different shapes and sizes. You've got to get them back in the X Division. You've got to start having great matches. And it's cliche, and I know I say it over and over again, but the tagline when it was first implemented is still true to this day. It's not about weight limits. It's about no limits. And the beauty of the X Division Championship was that it was kind of equivalent to the Ring of Honor Pure Championship, in the sense that it was just about having the best match on the card, and it was about a hybrid of all these kind of styles, whether it was Lucha Libre, high flying, whether it was European-based grappling or submission styles or hardcore styles, whatever. It was about anything you want it to be, and the X Division was meant to be about, like I said, a hybrid of all of these different styles. Yes, they had high flyers, and people might look at it and say, oh, it's just a version of a cruiserweight division, but it's got no weight limit on that. It was more than that, and I felt that Impact Wrestling needed to get back to that identity, and I've really enjoyed that they've done that this year. Whether it's having Ace Austin as the X Division champion once again, and now Josh Alexander being the X Division champion, I think is such a perfect name to be as the X Division champion, because he's not necessarily a high flyer, but he has great matches. The match he had against El Fantasma at Impact Under Siege was the best match on the show. By far. Easy. Done. And if he's having an hour-long match, either an Impact Wrestling television episode or on Against All Odds, then his stock continues to rise. And I'm a big fan and advocate of Josh Alexander. He is a guy that I said could be the guy to beat Kenny Omega if Moose didn't stay around. You know, option C, cash it in, get a World Championship opportunity. And look, if he's having hour-long Broadway classics, especially in this day and age, 2021, that's very exciting. So I'm really excited about that. It certainly looks like the talent that was backstage at the most recent set of Impact Wrestling television tapings, they're excited about that as well, which is always exciting to see as well. So we're going to have to wait and see who it is, but I'm already excited to see what happens for it. And finally, speaking of Impact on Access TV, we have a couple other things that have been announced for Thursday's episode on Impact on Access TV. Impact has announced 2 matches and 2 segments of Thursday's show. In a 10-woman tag team match, Knockouts tag team champions Fire and Flavor will team up with the Knockouts champion Deonna Purrazzo, Kimberly, and Susan against Rosemary, Havoc, Tenille Dashwood, Taylor Wilde, and Rachel Ellering. The match was set into motion last Thursday after Tenille Dashwood's victory over Hogan. The heels then jumped Tenille Dashwood, which led to Wild, Havoc, and Rosemary coming out at different points to make the save. In a match announced Thursday X Division champion, as I just mentioned, Josh Alexander, will team with Petey Williams against TJP and Fowler Bar. TJP won Bar's freedom from Johnny Swinger on Thursday's show, which enraged Williams, who are teamed with TJP at Under Siege. 2 segments were also announced as Sami Callihan will kick off the show, while new tag team champions Violent by Design, Rhino and Joe Doring will address Impact. So when it comes to Sami Callihan, I think they're going to probably address the Good Brothers attacking him at Under Siege. And when it comes to Violent by Design, we did a video speaking in depth about him yesterday. Huge fan of that faction. Really interested to see where they go going forward with it and who's going to be the one to challenge him. So looks to be an exciting episode of Impact on Thursday. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these Impact stories we've spoken about today? The potentially scrapped, maybe, storyline with Don Callis and Scott D'Amore. The buzz about the X Division Championship match going 60 minutes. We're really excited to see what happens there. And the segments and matches announced for Impact on Thursday. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.